Eye of the sports guy.
The sports guy.
This is important. It's top secret for your eyes only.
Just to set the record straight, they did not rope me into doing a podcast. I actually was excited to have one once I found out that you did not have to leave your house.
Now, Eye of the sports guy.
Here's the sports guy, Bill Simmons.
Welcome to Eye of the Sports Guy. I'm laughing because the lady's voice in the beginning that you just heard sounds suspiciously like the lady's voice in Wayne's World when Wayne and Garth finally sell out and they do their TV show and they had that professional-sounding female narrator. A couple readers have pointed that out to me, and you could draw your own parallels here. As the lady said, my name is Bill Simmons. I write the Sports Guy column for ESPN.com and ESPN the Magazine. You can read all of my columns at bostonsportsguy.com, and currently I have a giant knot in my stomach because we are dangerously close to the 2007 draft lottery, a fork-in-the-road moment for the Boston Celtics, where the next 15 years of the franchise is at stake, and I feel sick constantly. So hopefully we can survive this lottery with one of the top two picks, and oh my God, I can't even think about the alternatives. I really can't. In fact, I don't want to talk about it anymore. So let's bring on this week's guest. He's played for 3 different NBA teams. He just wrote a book about his career called Can I Keep My Jersey, which was just released by Random House. Now, NBA players have written books before, but this is the first time since Bill Bradley's Life on the Run that the player actually wrote the book. So you need to get it just for that reason, because knowing the NBA, this may never happen again. Paul Shirley, welcome to the show.
Might be a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon.
Yeah, at least once in a generation, I'm thinking. Now, are you surprised that you're the first Iowa State hoops player to write a book and that it was not Marcus Fizer or Jamal Tinsley?
I think our graduation rate was like 4% at Iowa State, so I suppose it's about normal that follows.
How did you end up at Iowa State? I've always wondered that, and especially the team that you ended up on just seemed like the most improbable team you ever could have played for.
Yeah, it is sort of a bizarre grouping of human beings, isn't it?
Yeah.
I grew up in the shadow of Kansas. Like, I grew up a huge KU fan, and so basically dreamed every night of going to play for KU someday. Then I got to be a pretty good high school basketball player. Went over to Roy Williams' office one day to try to beg a spot somehow, like figure out a way to end up playing for KU. And at the time, I was being recruited by like the powerhouses like North Dakota and Vermont, and
nice.
Some of the schools back your way like Dartmouth and Davidson and stuff like that. And so I went into his office with my parents, you know, kind of that humble white kid from Kansas, like, oh, Mr. Williams, it'd be great to have the honor to play for your team and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Hoping that maybe we could, like, get me to walk on there or something. And he said, well, Paul, you know, it'd be great if you came here, but I just don't think you'd ever play because I don't think you're good enough to play in the Big 12.
Oh.
Like, oh, well, okay. So I had a little extra motivation when I went up to Iowa State on an academic scholarship, actually. I had found Tim Floyd was there, and they didn't have any scholarships left, but I was a national merit finalist, so they found one of those scholarships for me. And then we beat them the last 4 times we played them in my career, which was poetic justice.
Did you ever, like, did you pull your jersey up and pound your chest and point at him?
I never had to. I could always, like, just sort of glare at him after the game, and I think we both kind of knew what the situation was.
Yeah, I'm guessing, like, he probably cared for, like, a second, and then he remembered that he was making, like, $5 million a year.
Right. He's one of those people who drives me insane because he somehow snowed over the people of Kansas into thinking that he's this, like, down-home, you know, aw, shucks kind of guy, but he's as slick as the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, how many college coaches aren't slick? Like, yeah, I really feel like it's the one job where you're basically a used car salesman.
Well, that's the exact term I was going to use. They all have figured out how to talk people into things, because how are you going to sell? Like, even Tim Floyd, who's one of my favorite people in the world, when he was
and a really good basketball coach.
Right, great human being, but when he was at Iowa State, you're trying to talk these kids into going to Ames, Iowa for 4 years to play basketball. Like, you got to fudge the truth a little bit. It's a brutal place to be.
Yeah, and you look at like somebody like Rick Barnes, who everybody says is a great recruiter, but he's not a good basketball coach.
Right.
But he manages to land all these guys, and it really seems like when you're a college coach, 95% of it is the recruiting, and then the other 5% is, oh wow, I hope this guy can coach too.
Well,
but it really comes down to who you get.
you've been to Austin. Like, how hard would it be to recruit to the University of Texas? Like, well, here's this really cool place to be, and all the girls on campus are attractive. Do you want to come here?
That's a good point. Although, Durant was from Maryland, and I just can't figure out how Maryland or Georgetown doesn't somehow figure out a way to woo him over.
Yeah.
Like if you're a college coach and you have a guy who's a potential franchise guy in your state, how do you not get that guy?
Yeah, I wonder if it's sort of like when a team is favored in an NBA playoff series and they come home and it's almost like there's too much pressure for them to win. Like,
right.
In that situation, they almost feel like they're obligated to get the guy, and so they probably trip over themselves somehow.
Or somebody else just offered him more money. It's probably one or the other.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you know what the thing is about you college players? All the Div 1 guys, it's like the mafia.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever talks about money. It's like it never happened. Nobody ever got paid off. Even like somebody like Marvin Barnes who just got arrested for, again for coke or whatever. Mm-hmm. These guys never come forward and admit that they got paid. It's like a code of omerta.
I so wish that I had been offered money, because I would absolutely blow people out of the water about it, because now that I'm done with college basketball, who cares? But
right.
I certainly was not good enough to warrant that. And I don't know that in retrospective conversations with people, some have whispered that there were boosters at Iowa State paying people, but we didn't have a lot of, besides Pfizer, we didn't have a lot of like blue chip recruits. We had a bunch of also rans and kind of throwaways. So I didn't have a lot of direct experience with it, but it's certainly talked about a lot. It's just that no one, like you said, has ever like stepped up and said, yeah, they gave me $250,000.
Yeah, very rarely happens. I love the fact that there are Iowa State boosters, by the way.
Well,
like the most successful tractor salesman in Iowa is a good booster.
Right. It's funny, the cult of Iowa and Iowa State fans is pretty strong, because there's nothing else up there. It's not like there are any pro teams, and I think I've been debating this whole idea that the NBA is just basically screwed up and has forgotten about everybody, the great white middle, as it were. And a lot of that is just because people are so into college basketball. It's such a fixture in their lives that they don't have time to worry about the NBA.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because I forget who first made this point, but people are talking about how the NBA is trying to expand into Europe and trying to expand their reach globally and all that. And man, I wish I could remember who said this. I think it might have been Michael Wilbon, but why isn't the NBA more worried about expanding its reach in the United States?
Yeah, I know.
Why wouldn't it be trying to, like what you saw happen with Oklahoma City, and that whole city just immediately responded to having the Hornets there. Now you have this basketball hotbed for the NBA. You would think there would be 10, 11 American cities that you could do that in, right?
Yeah, didn't Cuban write something about this recently too?
That maybe he was the one who did it. Yeah,
I didn't read it, but I
like
heard about it, and it absolutely baffles me. And you're well qualified to answer this question, because you're in touch with the NBA scene. But Neil Pollack and I were doing this thing on Slate.com this week, kind of talking about like what has gone wrong. Because in my belief, the NBA is great. It's really the perfect sport. I mean, it's different than football, which is so pre-programmed, and baseball is just too boring, and soccer is even more boring. So NBA basketball is a really great thing to watch, yet it's still the third place sport of the majors. And it's my opinion that someone screwed up when they started trying to market the individual in professional basketball. The NFL markets the team, and so then the teams sort of withstand the screw-ups of the players over time. David Stern kind of embraced the Michael Jordan model, but he didn't realize at the time that there was only one Michael Jordan, that combination of the best player in the world who's also the most noble and does it all with grace, and you're never going to find that again.
Well, and then you had all the guys coming into the league who wanted to be marketed like that and who were positioning themselves as the next Michael Jordan.
Right.
So it kind of compounded itself. Yeah. I think there's a lot of different fingers you can point at what the problems have been. I think just from you played AAU, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just that whole culture of you're just playing a game every day, and it doesn't matter if your team won or lost. It just matters if you played well.
Yeah.
And that's ingrained in you from the time you're 12, 13, 14. And you look at these guys that come in the league, and the losses just bounce off them. Like when you wrote that thing about how you cried when Iowa State got bounced out of the tournament. When's the last time you saw an NBA player cry?
Yeah, it's unlikely, and I think part of that is just the number of games that are played even in the NBA season. People forget that part of the reason they love watching college basketball is, like you mentioned, the sense of urgency that there are only 30 games in the year. In the NBA, it's just sort of water off their back, like you said. I mean, it just there's another game the next night, and we move on and go forward.
You know, back to the point about the NBA expanding its reach. You grew up in like outside of Kansas City, right?
Right, in a little tiny town by Topeka, Kansas.
So when the NBA, the Kings left there, I think like somewhere in the early 80s,
yeah,
like
83. 83, yeah.
So when the NBA would come back for like an exhibition game or something, it was a big deal, right?
I think people
really?
just have just lost touch.
Yeah.
I don't know that if I went to my hometown and took a random sampling of 10 middle-aged males and asked them to name 5 NBA teams, I don't know that they could do it.
Right.
And that's remarkable if you think about it, because those same guys could probably line up the NFL teams into their conferences for you if you needed them to.
I got so depressed I was watching Game 6 of the Nets-Cavs series.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like
you know,
on your part.
Well, the Nets fans have an excuse because their team's moving to Brooklyn. They kind of know they're getting ditched, so it's hard to really fault them for not giving a crap.
Right.
But at the same time, it was just such a depressing atmosphere, and everybody's got thunder sticks, and they're kind of like half-heartedly banging them. Meanwhile, their season's on the line. They're just half-heartedly banging these thunder sticks. I'm thinking, like, there's got to be a better city than New Jersey for an NBA team. Like,
right.
Whether it's Kansas City or Oklahoma City or Fargo, I don't know what, but we've got to be able to do better than this.
Yeah, that's been one of the interesting things of my minor league experiences is just how into the games people get in, like, Yakima, Washington, or Fargo, North Dakota, because there is nothing else to do. The people just are living and dying by their team. I mean, I saw the same phenomenon just coming back from Spain on the island of Menorca, where there are only 65,000 people in the entire island, and 5,000 of them were at our games and were losing their minds,
right,
whether we won or lost. When we finally saved the team from relegation to the second division and came back to the island the next day, there were 5,000 people waiting in the city center, and we went up on this balcony to, like, pontiff style, talk to the masses as they bowed at our feet. And you're right, you don't get that in New Jersey.
No, and it's funny, like the best NHL crowd by all accounts, like just the loudest, most lively crowd that you'd want to go to if you went to one NHL game is Edmonton.
Oh,
Edmonton is like Edmonton makes Winnipeg look like Montreal.
Right.
But it has the best crowd, so I really feel like the NBA needs to think about that. But let's talk about some of the teams you played for. One of my favorite things that we discussed was you're a big believer in team chemistry, and you had both ends of the spectrum within 12 months, because I think you played for the 2004 Bulls and then the 2005 Suns, which was just both ends of the spectrum. So I wanted to talk about that.
Well, I think the one time when I was actually in a different situation, I went and worked out with the Spurs for a week the year after I played for the Suns, and there's a guy named Sam Presti who's there who gets mentioned for GM jobs all the time.
He's a Boston guy.
Is he?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I'm hoping he takes over the Celtics, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that'd be too perfect for them, so it won't happen. Great guy, really smart, and he made the point that great teams are made when their best players are also their best guys. And like San Antonio, their best player is like the hardest worker and the best guy on the team. And same for Phoenix. Steve Nash is the leader, but he also happens to be the best human on the team. The Bulls didn't really have a leader. This was the year of Pfizer was still there. They had Curry and Chandler and Jamal Crawford and the Junkyard Dog and all these guys. Antonio Davis was just completely confused because he was surrounded by all these folks. And so it was basically this team without a head, basically. And I think teams need that dominating personality of a guy who, it's not like he has to scream at someone and to keep them in line, but it's almost like they want to live up to his expectations. There's a certain charisma needed in order to sort of keep these dominant personalities in check.
Well, you joined the Suns right as Nash was developing into that personality. Could you see that happening when you were there?
Yeah, it's strange because he's obviously not a real vocal leader, but I think everyone respects him so much because he puts so much time and energy into it that they don't want to let this guy down who's obviously working harder than everyone else. And it's not to say that Shawn Marion isn't a hard worker per se, but I don't think I ever saw him practice 10 jump shots in the entire season I was there. So even
he has a posse to take care of, though.
Right. He's got other responsibilities. But even he recognizes just how much investment, say, Steve Nash is putting into it, and I think just doesn't want to screw that up for him.
So you had like both ends of the spectrum there, because you had Nash, who, you know, is an exceptionally coordinated guy and can see the court and all that stuff, but also works harder than just about anybody.
Right.
And then you had Amari and Shawn Marion, who are two of the greatest athletes in the league right now, and everything comes so naturally to them.
Right.
Were you ever watching those two guys and thinking, like, why don't you guys model yourself after Nash?
Right. Well, I don't even know. What would Shawn Marion, it's weird that Shawn Marion, for example, I don't think it has ever occurred to him that he wouldn't be a really great basketball player, and that's part of what's good about him. Like, he has maybe, do you think he might have the worst looking shot in the NBA of anybody who shoots regularly?
Yeah, you know what, and I like it, because when we were growing up, they didn't have these basketball camps and these instructors, and now it's like people come off an assembly line, everybody shoots the same.
Right.
I like the guys with the different shots. Like I remember like Jamal Wilkes was my favorite shot growing up. It was like coming from his spine basically.
Right.
But it is, man, is it ugly.
Yeah, if Wilkes comes from his spine, then Marion's comes from his scrotum. Or something.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think Shawn has ever like stopped to think about the fact that he doesn't shoot it like everyone else. He just plays basketball. He doesn't, like I said, he's not the guy that's in there after the day's practice where he went 0 for 8 and concerned about it, which is probably a really great thing for basketball. And like you said, I'm always envious of those guys because I'm in there obsessing about my 1 for 2 performance or my 0 for 2 performance on the day or something.
Yeah. Well, you played against both of those guys, and then this summer you played against KG.
Yeah.
And you said out of anybody you played with, you thought KG was the best basketball player you'd ever seen, right?
Yeah, he's just unbelievable. I don't think people always take into account just how tall he is, and it seems like a really vast generalization, but tall basketball players are pretty good. I think
right.
The same is forgotten about Nowitzki. Like, he is just so big that to be able to do what he can do and be that tall is just devastating. Garnett is kind of along the same lines as Nash, the best, like the hardest worker on the team, but he's almost so intense and obsessive. I wonder if that almost turns other guys off because it's almost obvious that you could never take basketball this seriously, whereas Nash has a certain joviality about him when he goes about his work. Garnett is like a drill sergeant all the time, and it's almost like he's eating himself up with that.
Yeah, and I've written about that a bunch of times because I think that's been the biggest obstacle for him. And everybody's like, even recently I wrote last week that I thought the Suns should trade Amari for KG this summer because I think they would have beaten the Spurs with KG.
Yeah.
But the catch with KG is that he's really homicidal with the way he carries himself, and I think he burns out his teammates. You just watch him on the court during a 2.5-hour game, and it's like he's going through the emotional ringer.
Right.
The one time he advanced in the playoffs was the year he made the conference finals against the Lakers. By the end of that series, he had nothing left. I mean, the gas tank was on empty. He would have zero left for the finals.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you can carry yourself like that during a 100-game season.
I really think that the location of his team has changed his entire outlook because you think about, and it sounds again sort of fossil, but the fact that he's in Minneapolis where there's nothing else to do, even for him, for the fans, whomever, so that basketball takes on even more importance than it does in like Phoenix, where you can kind of feel like a little more relaxed about life in general, but there's that certain like upper Midwest work ethic that has probably imprinted itself a little too much on him.
Yeah, you make a good point because I've had it both ways. I've had cold weather city where everybody is just obsessed with sports, and I've had warm weather city where nobody cares about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier to live in the warm weather city.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I hate saying it, but it's true, and I know KG lives here. He lives in Malibu during the summers, which I always thought was funny because I imagine these like rich old guys sitting in their beach house, and then they see this 7'1" black guy jogging on their beach at 6 a.m, and they probably have a heart attack. But I do think if KG played for the Clippers or the Lakers or the Suns, a team like that, maybe that would help him.
Yeah, I think certain people need that. Like if you put another guy in too relaxed of a place, then it's not gonna work out. If you put Kwame Brown in Los Angeles, like obviously that's not gonna work. He needs to be in Milwaukee or something where it's just basketball all the time.
And then you take somebody like Ricky Davis, where you could really put him anywhere and he's gonna have a good time.
Right. Yeah. Ricky Davis, like. It's strange for me because I grew up this like obsessive basketball worker. Like I was the typical, go outside and shoot for hours and hours. But I really, really respect guys like him and Radmanovich who just seem like they don't care at all and just go out and play the same every day.
Yeah.
Maybe because I'm envious of that personality a little bit.
They go out and play the same every day, and it doesn't matter how late they stayed out the night before. Right. I think that's also... I wish that was played up more, and I wish we had more information about how late the guys stayed up the night before. Like, I've just heard so many great stories about so many different players, and I feel like it's like the hidden aspect of this league. Like, somebody could stay up all night and then play a noon game in New Jersey the next day and put up a triple-double. Like, it's amazing to me.
Yeah, and it is. I think people assume that there are more guys like that. There's just so few who can really do that. Even Kevin Garnett, who is just a genetic freak, he really takes care of himself and doesn't mess around too much. But then there are those few guys like a Ricky Davis who can do whatever he wants to his body, and it doesn't matter.
Well, Iverson is the same way. Everybody says Iverson sleeps 2 hours a day, and for the last 5 years we've heard this was going to be the season it catches up to him. He's just going to fall apart. The guy's a freak of nature. Like when he dies, he needs to be studied like we studied Secretariat after Secretariat died. And they found out Secretariat's heart was like twice the size of a normal horse. I feel like the same thing's going to happen with Iverson.
Yeah. You can imagine, you could just imagine what life is like in the NBA for me, because I'm closer to you than I am to Kevin Garnett. And so for me to see Amari Stoudemire, who they literally will not let lift weights, like because he would get too big. Like, imagine that. Like, they won't let him do, say, bench press because his chest would get too big and he would look like LeVar Arrington out.
Well, and that's another underrated thing of the NBA that you and I have talked about. I don't think a lot of people realize. Life on the road when you're playing for an NBA team is actually not that exciting. It's kind of lonely. Like if you've ever seen an NBA team get off the bus, everybody's got their headphones on.
Right.
They're carrying their bags. Nobody's even talking to one another. They're like just these mini buildings just kind of moving.
Yeah. It's like all these little tiny, like buildings is a good example because inside those buildings are these little corporations basically, and everyone's sort of, at this point it's sad, but it's true. Everyone's sort of calculating like what the repercussions are of every action they're doing for their bank account, basically.
And they show up, they've got like 4 pieces of luggage that somebody brings up to their room.
Right.
They show up to the room, they hook up their video game or whatever they're doing, or they call whoever their friend is in that city and they try to figure out where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like the guys on the team actually really ever hang out.
Not as much as I guess I would have thought, or what people think in general. I've written about this before, but when I was a kid, I always read these biographies of Lou Gehrig and Mickey Mantle and all that, and I would kind of envision professional sports if I ever got to that, if I could ever fulfill this dream and play in the NBA. I assumed that it would be like the 1927 Yankees, and like after the game, on a road trip, we'd go out and chase women and booze it up a little bit and just be this like huge pack of dudes who are all kind of into playing basketball. But it's not really the case. I think part of it is that, as you said, in a way, an NBA game is like a glorified pickup game. I mean, the guys know that the chances that they're going to be on the same team with the guy they're playing with now next year are kind of slim. I mean, they might be there, they might not. So they basically could be switching jerseys at any point. So it doesn't really behoove them to get too close to anybody.
Well, it's funny you mention that because there's this book that came out 30 years ago called The Short Season by John Powers, which is about like the 77-78 Boston Celtics.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like the most dated sports book in the history of sports books because this guy, like after the games, he goes out to dinner with 7 of the Celtics to the Scotch and sirloin.
Right.
And it's like, hey, yeah, John Havlicek and Dave Cowens and I, so we're having steak. And I'm thinking, like, this would, not only would a reporter never even, they wouldn't even talk to this guy outside of the arena.
Right.
But 3 of these guys wouldn't go out together and get a steak. I mean, you'd be lucky like 3 times a year if they're getting dinner. It just seems like a totally different era. But, another thing I always enjoy about our conversations and when you write is there's like a cult of the white guys in the NBA where all the white guys in the other team and you have these unspoken moments and you feel obligated to talk to them. It's like Brian Scalabrine, Jared Reiner, Scott Padgett.
Right.
You have to like give them like 1 minute. Hey, how's it going? How you doing? Do you feel that kinship with those guys? For
sure. It took me a while to kind of understand that. I remember when it first hit me was when I was, I think, playing garbage time for the Bulls. Actually, I remember playing a lot in this game. It's maybe where my career high of 6 points came when we were playing against the Cavaliers on the road. And toward the end of the game, Jason Capono, who was playing for them at the time and who was like totally out of his element with that team, as you can imagine, like LeBron James and Ira Newble and just a bunch of random dudes. He comes on the court, and I'd never spoken to Jason Capono in my life and didn't have any reason to think he knew who I was. And he goes, "Hey, Paul, how's it going?" I'm like, "Oh, whoa. Oh, yeah, I guess we know each other because we're the white guys." You
guys should have a Facebook group.
Yeah.
Or like some sort of MySpace page, and you could all keep in contact.
Yeah.
Who had all the posses you saw during your NBA experiences so far? Who had the best, the most elaborate posse?
I always enjoyed Joe Johnson's, actually. Which
really?
You wouldn't think, because he's this quiet guy, and you would assume that he would be just super insulated from the world, and I guess probably that's actually the case, because he has these guys who would, when I was in Phoenix, they would come to practice every day and sit there in silence during practice. 4 guys that would ride up in his Escalade or whatever, and then they would all walk in total muted non-conversation to the locker room, hang out while he put on his gear, walk with him to the practice court, watch practice, and then leave with him. And none of them, including Joe, would speak to anyone the entire time.
Intriguing.
Yeah.
I never would have guessed Joe Johnson.
Yeah, I don't think it was a real, like, it wasn't like a debauchery-filled posse. It was more just like a comfort zone posse in a way, which is really what all of those guys are about in the first place.
Yeah, because, I'm sure if you were making $10 million a year, you'd have your brother traveling with you, right?
Right, for sure.
How many people would you have in your posse?
I would have, I think 2 is the right. You got to have 3 guys to go out with, don't you think?
Yeah. See, I've actually thought about this a lot. Go figure.
I could tell.
I think I'd have 5.
5?
Yeah, I think I'd have 5, and I'd want to make sure nobody was better looking than me.
Right.
Because I'd be getting the woman anyway, but I just want to make sure there wasn't that one guy who might, I'm competing with him. I definitely have 1 fat guy. And,
you got to have the turtle character, right?
Right. But I think having a posse would be really cool.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
It'd be fun to have people who just were directly tied to your well-being at all times. You know what I mean? Everything that happened to you directly affects them, good or bad.
Now, so you would say, like, let's say you were going out on the town in your pre-married and with a family days. Would you prefer to go out with 5 dudes? Would that be the perfect number to
I would
go
say
out
5,
on
4 or 5. I think would be the best number. You never want to push it past the point where you have to take 2 cabs.
Right.
And I actually use the same philosophy in Vegas. If you have a bachelor party, you always want to do numbers by 4.
Oh, yeah.
Like you don't want to have 9 because, and you know what happens is the 9th man always ends up showing up and screwing up the numbers and screwing up the table for 8 in Vegas and all that stuff.
Right.
So you always want to keep it. Ideally, you want to plan 7 because you got to factor in the 1 extra guy that's going to show up that nobody knows who the hell he is.
Yeah, of course.
And that would be the 8. But yeah, I'm a big believer in the numbers of 4, 5 maximum. But see, you have your brother. Who would be the other guy?
Well, I actually have 2 brothers who live with me.
2 brothers. Well, there you go.
I actually have 3 brothers, but 2 of them live with me. And
you'd have to have a 4th guy, though.
I think you're right. Like the fat guy, you need
a fat guy.
Like with me, height comes into play. Like I don't want to go out with people who are super short because then I look like Manute Bol by comparison and just feel kind of odd all the time. And my brothers are tall, so like it'd be great to have the two other tall guys with me, and then like the short fat guy who's totally secure with himself and like the women can be friends with, and he sort of like deflects them like a super ball into the waiting.
Yeah, well, the whole height thing is so underrated. Like even when I was in Miami for the Super Bowl week, and I was in the same club that Tom Brady was in, and you forget he's 6'5".
Right.
So he's in this club where everybody's 6 feet and under. He's already Tom Brady, so he's already going to stand out. And then he's a good half foot taller than everybody else. So he's like basically hiding where the fire exit is, you know, in the corner, and there's three people buffering him, but he stood out like a sore thumb the whole time. So I can't even imagine, like, if you're a basketball player, how you would have a good time going out.
Right. I think by myself I look like a circus freak, but if I'm with two other tall people, then it's like, oh, well, maybe they're related or a basketball team, so I'm not going to go up to them and pester them with questions.
Do you see any TV, radio in your future at some point, please?
I could.
You could do TV, right?
I just don't want to be Tom Tolbert. Not that there's anything wrong with Tom Tolbert, but like, can you imagine? You can imagine it because you're good at, like, you have a good base of NBA knowledge. But like sitting there through an NBA game and like talking about just this mundane, inane details of the game for 82 games a year. I don't think I could do it.
What about sideline reporter? So you're ruling that one out too then?
Maybe, but you can't. Then you got to deal with like going up to some guy and saying, "So, what'd you think about the first half?"
Yeah.
Really? But I mean, there is a place, I think, like, let's say you and I were commentating a random like college football game. I feel like it would be more entertaining than the two guys that they probably would hire to do the job in the first place.
Well, maybe we should get what's the league now? The NBDL.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get on the broadcast team for that. Coming to you live from Fargo.
I feel like we would probably get ourselves into trouble in the NBDL because there'd just be so much ridiculous nonsense going on.
Well, that's what, for a column, I did 2 college basketball games with my friend Rob Stone, and we did the WAC conference, which has like Pepperdine and Gonzaga and all those teams. And you know, I made all the jokes that everybody would make if they were watching the game with 2 of their buddies, and it worked great. And, you know, the problem was that if we ever did it for UNC Duke, everybody would have flipped out.
Right, of course, yeah. They
so
want to get offended by something.
Right, so it worked because it was the WAC. But, you know, and I think with the NBA, I can imagine, like, if they had hired us, we'd do 1 game, and then David Stern would have us killed 2 hours later.
Probably, yeah.
That would be it.
But you've written more, you've done a great job of pinpointing, like, how bad the announcing is, especially in the NFL and other places too. But why don't they just hire people who are funny and who like to be together? Like, funny being the key word. Like, you could basically throw 2 comedians into a situation. It'd be more entertaining than 2 ex-football players. And preferably they like each other and want to hang out, and then they can have some sort of rapport.
Well, it all comes to, it's basically your same premise as with the NBA teams. Why do they discount chemistry?
Yeah, true.
They just slap names together and they're like, oh, Marcus Pfizer's good, Jamal Crawford's good. Like, they have no overall assessment of how these guys would correlate to one another. Let me ask you about your book, because it got released last week. How long did you take on it? What did you feel about the writing process? Did it drive you insane? Give me all the details.
It's I'm sure you probably feel the same way, but now anytime I catch a glimpse of anything from the book, it makes me nauseous. Like, I just can't stand to look at it because I've seen it so many times. It was kind of exhausting. I was fortunate in that I had a whole bunch of material that I basically had to round into shape for the book. So it wasn't like I started from scratch. But in some ways, I think it almost would have been easier to start from nothing and go, because I was having to go back and take things that I had written when I was a terrible writer and try to make them to a certain level as to now when I'm a mediocre writer. And
we had the same experience, because I did the same thing with my Red Sox book. I had to go through these old columns that were just almost unreadable, and try to salvage them and make them at least readable. It was so frustrating.
Right. You're like, oh my, why didn't you just write it right the first time, Paul? Like, what's wrong with you? This is just dumb.
Let me tell you something. About a year from now, you're going to reread your book, and you're going to be mad at the book.
Oh, I'm confident that's true. I mean, I was already, when I was posting the introduction on MySpace, I had to, for my MySpace army, I had to edit it because it's bizarre getting it into their format. And as I was reading, I'm like, Jesus Christ, it was probably a year old at this point. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Why did you use these words? This doesn't make any sense, but it's too late.
Yeah, that's probably the most frustrating thing with writing is because it's not like sports. Like in sports, you peak when you're 27, 28,
Right.
29, and then
Right.
you basically hang on after that. I don't think writers really peak until they're late 30s, 40, 41, something like that. So basically everything you write from age 22 to 35, you realize 9 months later that you could have done it better.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating. I think about it constantly.
Yeah, it has been. At the end of the day, I'm sure you went through this process too, and I am in the middle of it now, of like worrying about my Amazon number and whether I'm doing a good job of like coming up with a good wisecrack for some radio show or whatever. But at the end of it all, like I have this book that when I'm 75, if I never write another one and if I never do anything else constructive in my life, I'll be able to like pick up this book and leaf through it and remember all of these things that I did, and that's really cool.
Yeah. And have you gone to the bookstore yet and stood next to the sports section and waited for somebody to pick it up?
Not yet. I just got back to Kansas City yesterday, and I'm planning to do that soon. I had a book signing last night, which kind of reminded me that the book publishing world is not nearly on the level with a lot of the other industries I've been a part of as far as like their ability to market things. They're not
Right.
They're not real polished. I was doing this signing with Max Falkenstein, who's the longtime voice of the KU Jayhawks, who's written a book, and we're sitting there at the front of the borders, and there's this like really meek salesman standing there who's like handing out coupons to the coffee shop to people, and he's like, "Oh, and if you're a sports fan, then feel free to check out. We've got some authors here." But they need to be. And then eventually, I like push them aside. Basically, I'm like, "Hey, as people come in, do you guys like books? Well, you should check out these two because we're not bad. And read the introduction at least, and then walk away and put it back on the table if you like. But at least give it a try." And
Yeah.
not that I'm a great salesman, but at least there needs to be some sort of effort to push these things.
Well, and it's amazing because it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right.
Yeah. This could be, by the way, a whole other podcast. I think we should move on because I don't want to get angry.
You're gonna get torqued. I can sense it in your voice. You're like just dropping into a lower.
I know.
gear.
You're making me angry.
Started.
I think I'm going to commit a homicide tonight. The one thing, the difference between you and I is that I can sneak into a bookstore, put a hat on, and just stare at people as they walk by my book. But you really can't because you're 6'10".
Right.
And,
I probably don't have this restraint you do. I'd be like trying to push it on them. Like, please, just seriously, read the introduction. It's not nearly as bad. I know it sounds dumb that a basketball player has written a book, but just check it out.
Yeah, and what you said about the Amazon number, it's so true. And it's just, you just reload it, and you reload it, and you wait for it to go up. And finally I had to delete it from my bookmarks. I was actually doing it on iTunes last week with this podcast, because I was number 2.
Right.
And NPR's Car Talk was number 1. And I could not pass this freaking Car Talk show. So then I was like, all right, well, this must be the greatest show ever. And I listened to it, and it wasn't. So now I have to figure out how to beat these guys for 1 week, or I'm going to go nuts.
Right. Well, and with Amazon, it's perfectly acceptable that Harry Potter is number 1 and that The Dangerous Book for Boys is number 4 or whatever. But then you'll see like the Big Book of Gun Values at number 52, and I'm thinking like, who's buying that? Like you don't just go to the library and say, well, this Remington from 1952 I have is worth $1,400, and then put it back. Why do you need to keep the book? Like, what possible function could that serve?
Well, you're not in the position yet where you can really burn your bridges because you still want to have an NBA career.
Right. And
you're only 29, and you have one more run in you, and you look at somebody like Scalabrini who's making $3 million a year, and it's just hard to give up the dream at this point, I'm sure.
Right.
You got at least 4 years left where you really have to go after it. And then probably after like your 5th ACL surgery when you're 33,
right,
you have the Ken Reeves knee brace on, you'll probably have to give it up. But at that point, I want you to write another book and really unleash holy hell.
Really just unload on.
You gotta give us all the dirt that we need, which player was the biggest partier. I want like all the dirt, but I know you can't do that yet.
Yeah, I can't quite get to that level. Plus,
no.
I think part of, and in dealing with making the pilot last year out in LA, I learned that people want to hear about that. The problem is that there's just so little of that goes on, and like we mentioned earlier, it's also sterilized. I think that's part of the.
Well, you got to make some stuff up then.
Right, I'll just have to create things.
Yeah, you're just gonna have to, or you're gonna have to write one of those fictionally non-fictional novels about the Phoenix Stars with their white point guard Steve Nicks, and yeah, you could do it that way too. But anyway, we got to wrap this up. Best of luck with the podcast. I mean, best of luck with the book.
Yeah, and best of luck with the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a good Freudian slip by me. Best of luck with the book. It's called Can I Keep My Jersey? Available at bookstores everywhere, and especially on Amazon.com, where Paul checks his ranking every 10 minutes. Paul, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Bill.
We'll be back next week with a very special guest. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but you'll all be excited. Until then.
If you like this edition of Eye of the Sports Guy, check out more ESPN Radio podcasts available at the iTunes Music Store and on PodCenter at ESPNRadio.com.